Batman is universally one of the most well-liked, respected, and referenced characters out there. One who is so inspirational because at his core, he is a man who took a tragic life experience and instead of excusing himself from taking any sort of responsibility, given that he easily has the money to do so, he instead chose to walk the path of ultimate responsibility, choosing to forge himself to struggle for years to come to build himself into someone capable of helping others, despite his humanity, his vulnerability to not only being killed, but also to falling to so many temptations that may easily corrupt and do corrupt those around him. A point I've never mentioned to anyone is I never had a date to things like prom in high school. One parent didn't like me because of my speech impediments, and thus my date broke it off the week of, which also happened for the homecoming dance. In fact, some people thought I was rather slow in the head because I sounded like I had a rather bizarre, unplaceable accent. And this led me to do what I had always done, what the character who inspired me had always done. I went to work, a feature that caused some of the coaches I had, including my tricking and cross-country coaches, to say I was their most dedicated athlete. And while this was a very nice thing to say, this is what for many years I saw as something of my ace in the hole. A special card I could whip out to keep going, keep trying to figure things out despite how bad I was. Even as I watched some rather, I'll say verbose individuals laugh at me. Even as I watched as they quit, refusing to push themselves because they felt it was getting too hard and they stopped. And this is understandable. Being human is tough. We all do make mistakes or fail to live up to expectations. A reason why the story of Bruce Wayne is even more impactful than that of other heroes. The story of Batman is a story of extreme struggle. We all know that Bruce was once a happy child who watched as both of his parents were murdered right in front of him. But what we may not realize is that Bruce actually blames himself for the murders. He feels that he is responsible. A story that he seldom shares except on extreme occasions when he's trying to get people and villains alike to take responsibility for their actions, to consider the fact that they themselves can make a positive difference, like when he talks to his adopted son Dick Grayson, or at one point tries to reform Harley Quinn and succeeds. Because on these occasions, Bruce explains that the night his parents were gunned down, Bruce begged his father to go see the Mark of Zorro, and upon exiting the theater, instead of taking the limo, Bruce instead asked his parents to walk home, taking them on a stroll through an ominously named crime alley where the shooting occurred. And it's from this event that Bruce began to open his eyes just to how bad things were for everyone else living in Gotham. So instead of going to Private Island, living out his days in extreme comfort, drinking and partying until the day he died, he decided to follow one of the hardest paths out there. One that both inspires and encourages many people to take control over aspects of their health, fitness, and studies, cause from here, Bruce chose to leave Gotham at the mature age of 14 years old, beginning what would be a decade-plus long world tour. One of Bruce's first stops was training for a single week with the heavyweight boxing champion known as Wildcat, paying him more money than a championship purse just to learn how to take a hit. Bruce then spent time enrolling at universities at Gotham, Yale, and then a few others around the world just to learn the basics of degrees like law, psychology, criminology, even lip reading. And because he didn't want anyone to find out what Bruce Wayne was doing, he gave himself only 1 to 2 semesters of intense focus and studying to learn the entire degree before switching to a new school. And while Bruce found that he was making lots of headway, there was still one problem. Things were moving too slow. He needed more teachers, more involved teachers with a high expertise in their respective fields to train him. So after a few short years, Bruce began pushing, driving himself harder than he ever had before, daring to go into more remote regions of foreign countries to find these teachers. And in order to even interact with some of these teachers in countries like France, Russia, Africa, and parts of Asia, he of course also had to learn how to speak their native language. A problem that never really went away, leading Bruce to dip his toes in an initial 6 languages or so, with him eventually learning somewhere around 40. And it's here that one of the first major influences that Bruce found was a French detective named Henry Ducard, who was renowned for his tracking and all-around man-hunting skills, who showed Bruce the ins and outs of thorough tracking work. And it's from here that Bruce then found his way into several secret martial art organizations, tracked down various assassins, found people who specialized in very specific skills like escape artistry and how to disappear from a room without anyone noticing, and went on to learn engineering from an eccentric Russian engineer named Sergei, who for a final test placed Bruce under a giant sphinx in Egypt with limited gear to pull from and a limited air supply. In fact, many of these teachers had just one rule, which was learn to survive, to build your way out or die, leading Bruce's journey to at times be rather extreme. But at its core, it is still the story of a man who decided who he was going to be and worked his tail off to get there, to be a reminder, an example of the human potential to learn, as Bruce earned every one of his skills. Cause even with all the money in the world, he can't pay someone to work out for him, to learn for him. I mean, more than other heroes, Batman hits on the simple psychological term known as identification, otherwise the tendency for us to recognize aspects of ourselves in someone else, even unconsciously modeling our behavior after them, as Batman allows ourselves to identify the part that he represents, literally embodies, getting us beyond any surface level ideas to something much deeper, much more meaningful for why we love the character. You see, the part of Bruce's journey to becoming the Batman that is largely left out is the fact that he failed not one but multiple of his teachers. When Bruce traveled deeper into China, he found the Taoism master Xiao La, who sought to teach Bruce to essentially empty his mind, to not let his fears and worries clutter his mind. Yet she constantly found Bruce doing just this despite all the instruction she had given him. And after 3 months of instruction and freeing experiences teaching Bruce how to live in the present, Bruce failed to understand, to grasp much of what she was trying to teach him, and eventually Bruce left to go to another teacher, finding himself in the presence of a much more corrupt old man known as He Xian Tan, who only cared about personal power, no matter the cost to oneself or others, with Xiao La even warning Bruce that there would be a price to pay for his teachings. And upon his arrival, He Xian Tan ordered Bruce to immediately kill his current pupil, with Bruce quickly refusing, now having made an enemy for life. But before leaving, after just a day, the old man still told Bruce about his future, of enemies who would try to kill him if he didn't do the same. And Bruce felt cheated, finally seeing how blind the man was to the world around him, to seeing killing as the only answer. As Bruce left, watching the whole place crumble in a severe storm, and having wasted months of his life having ignored the lessons of his first teacher, Bruce moved on. From here, Bruce tried meditation, finding certain extreme aspects to be a waste of even more months of his life, and later Bruce came to another man known as Chu Chin Li, who sought to teach Bruce how to endure great pain. Yet he also saw that Bruce refused to move on, to submit and cut any ties to his past and his mission to help Gotham. So Bruce once again left, apologizing to the teacher for wasting his time. And trying to hone up on his detective skills even more, Bruce found another teacher who flat out refused to teach him anything, as this man knew who he was, with the man instead choosing to give Bruce one of the lessons he thought he needed most, being how to cope when all the money and dedication in the world can't get you what you want. The same lesson Xiao La tried to freely give him through her Taoist teachings. And despite how distraught Bruce may have been from these situations, Bruce finally came to one of his final teachers on the border of China and North Korea, as he sought instruction under a man named Kirigi, a man who at one point tried to again break Bruce's no-kill rule, while also seeing that Bruce was marked by his past trauma, and realizing his mistake at teaching Bruce how to fight better than any other teacher had, Kirigi told Bruce that the real lesson he needed was once again how to let go of his past trauma, or more so his fears and worries for the future, with Bruce this time politely refusing for the sake of time. And watching Bruce go through all these teachers, while seeing him still excel at certain lessons, we still see him struggle through many. And that's not even mentioning just how long it took Bruce to learn some of the harder lessons many of the detectives or engineers like Sergei taught him, that he eventually succeeded at. I mean, it's many times that we often see Bruce scrape by at the last second, emerging as a success, yes, but just barely. In episodes of Batman the Animated Series, we see Bruce repeatedly have nightmares of his his mind still being clouded by the fear of losing friends, of his parents' death, even being shot by the same gun that killed his parents. And above this is Bruce's fear of failing to save those around him, and especially failing in the eyes of his parents, a point that he brings up to Alfred not once but multiple times across the animated series and even in films like Batman Begins. It's at these crucial and I'll say some of the most emotional moments we get out of the character's lengthy media that Alfred tells Bruce how proud his father and he is of him, even as Bruce watches in sadness as Wayne Manor burns above him, telling Alfred how he's failed and destroyed his family's legacy in the process. And this is where Alfred drops one of the most iconic lines in a running theme of the film and the character.
I failed. Why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
From here, we see Bruce do just that, getting up and going out to save the city. This is, for me, a huge part of what Batman is about, why he is so well loved and inspirational for so many. As a character, he is relatable. He is vulnerable. He has fears, loss, doubts. He struggles to learn lessons, fails, makes wrong decisions, can be harmed, beaten, and like a human, he has to pick himself back up each and every time. This possibly showcases the overall allure of the character, a main point as to why we continue to make so many shows and films on him. Cause as an imperfect human, Bruce holds up the idea that one person can actually make a difference. That if he chose not to get back up, not to work out the next day, not to study or become everything he could be, things would get worse. He is needed in the world. And while an argument could be made that this point only applies to the super elite like Batman, well, besides showing us that he's had to work at obtaining his skills, in the late 19th century, something known as chaos theory emerged. A mathematical model, a theory where mathematicians and later other scientists found that any system is governed by underlying patterns and laws that are extremely sensitive to the slightest change. And this gave rise to what has gone on to be known as the butterfly effect, a point in chaos theory where surprise scientists found that the slightest, seemingly insignificant change by any part of a system could and would lead to dramatic differences for everything in it. This is why Batman shows how one man can make a difference. It's the idea, the reality of interconnectedness, that each and every one of us are actually a node in a vast network we call human civilization, and any changes that we do or do not make have a much more profound and broad social, economic, and all-around widespread impact than we could possibly fathom. Simply put, your actions matter far more than most will ever know. And all of this being said, it's still possible that I'm really beating around the real reason why most adults still love Batman today. While I still think that Batman does stand in direct opposition to some extremely nihilistic teachers I knew, who I struggle to even call that, as some thought that nothing mattered, therefore they didn't have to do anything, and still somehow thought they were amazing even after most of their class was on a waitlist to leave into others like mine, Batman hits at something pretty deep for most of us. In Bruce's early days as Batman, we see Alfred constantly thinking he'll find Bruce in his bedroom or in the kitchen, only to once again find that he's down in the Batcave staring at the computer screen, often refusing to eat or drink anything Alfred offers to give him, as Bruce struggles to use both his compassion and his worst thoughts, his worst impulses to do and be good, rather than what would be all too easy. I mean, in the multitude of stories like the animated series, Batman Year One, and The Batman, early on we see Bruce struggle with finding a balance within himself, with using and controlling his darker impulses for the good of others rather than giving in to them. Once he even told Jason and Under the Red Hood that killing for him would be just too easy. It could create a horrible outcome as the network node that he is. So instead he chooses to wrestle with the darker side of himself, to choose to use it to give others a second chance rather than gunning them down just like his parents were, no matter how much he wants to. But if none of this was very interesting, then I say saved an interesting fact for last. Batman keeps up one of the most strict daily routines a person could possibly muster, choosing to follow unique workouts that prioritize strength while also training endurance, and doing the same for his brain, which, like muscles, can grow its density more than most realize if you know how to train it, cause deep down, who doesn't want to be as cool as the Batman? With us going over the science of what it would take to be Batman, growing your brain to be just like his in this video right here. Remember, it's just a trick. See you in the next one.